They found them at dawn. Dozens of coyote bodies piled beneath the Skinwalker Ranch sign like some kind of grotesque offering. No wounds, no blood, no signs of struggle or predation, just dead animals stacked in a pattern that made the security team immediately call for scientific backup. And when Dr. Travis Taylor arrived on scene, the first thing he said was, "This violates every principle of natural animal behavior I know." Within 48 hours, officials from multiple agencies descended on the property: wildlife biologists, federal investigators, veterinary pathologists. And after examining the scene, reviewing the overnight security footage, and conducting preliminary autopsies, they made an unprecedented decision: label the incident as potentially paranormal in origin, because nothing in conventional science could explain what happened to those coyotes or why it happened at Skinwalker Ranch. Subscribe now, because what we're about to reveal will challenge everything you thought you knew about what's possible at America's most paranormally active property. It was March 17th when Dragon, Skinwalker Ranch's head of security, made his routine morning patrol of the property perimeter. The sun was just coming up over the Utah desert, casting long shadows across the 512-acre ranch. Dragon had been doing this patrol for years, checking fence lines, examining overnight camera footage, making sure nothing unusual had occurred during the night hours when the ranch is most active. But as he approached the main entrance, the weathered sign reading Skinwalker Ranch visible in the early light, he saw something that made him stop the vehicle immediately. A massive pile of what appeared to be animal bodies directly beneath the ranch sign. From a distance, he couldn't identify the species, but the sheer number of carcasses was immediately alarming. Dragon radioed base camp immediately. His voice, normally calm and professional even when reporting strange phenomena, carried an edge of genuine concern. "We have a situation at the main entrance. Multiple animal casualties. I need the science team out here now." He didn't approach the pile initially. Years of working at Skinwalker Ranch had taught him that unusual scenes should be documented before being disturbed. When the initial response team arrived, they confirmed what Dragon had seen. Coyotes, dozens of them. At least 40 bodies, possibly more, stacked in what appeared to be a deliberate pile directly under the ranch entrance sign. The arrangement wasn't random. The bodies were layered, almost organized, in a way that suggested intentional placement rather than natural accumulation. But what immediately struck everyone present was what wasn't there. No blood, no visible wounds, no signs of struggle in the surrounding dirt, no tracks other than the coyote's own paw prints leading to the location. And perhaps most disturbing, no scavenger activity. In the Utah desert, dead animals attract scavengers within hours. Ravens, vultures, other coyotes, insects. But these bodies appeared untouched by any other wildlife. The team immediately secured the scene and began documentation. Photographs from multiple angles, video recording, measurements of the pile's dimensions, an account of the bodies, which eventually reached 43 individual coyotes of varying ages and both sexes. That number itself was significant. Coyotes are typically solitary hunters or operate in small family groups. To have 43 individuals in one location simultaneously violated normal behavioral patterns. Dr. Travis Taylor, the ranch's chief scientist, was off property that morning, but was immediately contacted. His response was to drop everything and drive directly to Skinwalker Ranch, calling in additional expertise en route. Because even over the phone, hearing the description of what had been found, he knew this wasn't a natural occurrence. And he knew that whatever investigation followed would need to be documented meticulously because the findings were going to be extraordinary. Dr. Travis Taylor arrived at Skinwalker Ranch 3 hours after the discovery. As an astrophysicist and aerospace engineer with decades of experience in scientific investigation, Taylor approaches anomalies with rigorous methodology. He's investigated everything from advanced propulsion systems to unexplained aerial phenomena. But as he later told colleagues, nothing in his scientific background prepared him for the scene beneath that ranch sign. Taylor's first action was to establish a controlled perimeter and ensure no one had disturbed the scene beyond initial documentation. He needed to preserve evidence integrity before conducting detailed analysis. Then he began his examination, starting with the overall scene configuration and working down to individual carcasses. The pile's arrangement immediately struck him as non-random. The bodies were oriented in a pattern, heads generally pointing inward, with larger individuals at the base and smaller ones toward the top. That kind of organization doesn't happen naturally. When animals die in groups, whether from disease, poisoning, or environmental factors, they fall randomly. This looked arranged. An arrangement implies intelligence and purpose. Taylor examined individual carcasses for signs of trauma. In his own words, captured on the investigation video, I'm looking at these animals and I see no external injuries, no gunshot wounds, no signs of blunt force trauma, no indication of predator attacks. These coyotes didn't die from physical violence. So what killed them? The condition of the bodies presented another puzzle. They appeared to have died recently within the past 12 to 18 hours, based on rigor mortis and environmental factors. But there was no decomposition smell, which should have been present in 40-plus dead animals even after just hours in the desert heat. Taylor noted this absence repeatedly during his examination, clearly troubled by the implication that normal biological processes weren't occurring as expected. Most disturbing to Taylor was the behavioral impossibility of the scene. Coyotes are intelligent, cautious animals. They don't congregate in large numbers. They're territorial. They avoid areas with heavy human activity. For 43 coyotes to be in the same location simultaneously, close enough to end up in a pile together, violated everything known about coyote social behavior and territorial patterns. Taylor made a statement that would later be widely quoted. "In 30 years of scientific investigation, I've never encountered a scenario where the evidence so completely contradicts established behavioral and biological principles. Either we're missing something fundamental about coyote behavior, or something happened here that doesn't fit into conventional scientific frameworks. And given that this is Skinwalker Ranch, I'm inclined toward the latter explanation." His immediate recommendation was to conduct full necropsies on multiple specimens, test for toxins and disease, review all overnight security footage, and bring in additional experts with specialized knowledge in wildlife pathology. Because whatever had happened here, Taylor knew it was going to require expertise beyond his own to even begin understanding. Skinwalker Ranch maintains extensive security camera coverage, including multiple angles on the main entrance where the coyote pile was discovered. The overnight footage was immediately pulled and reviewed, and what it showed was as disturbing as the pile itself, because the cameras captured the coyotes arriving, but what they didn't capture was any clear cause of death. The footage begins at approximately 11:47 p.m. the previous night. The area under the ranch sign is empty, normal nighttime scene. Then at 11:52 p.m. the first coyote appears on camera, walking normally. No signs of distress or unusual behavior. It approaches the area beneath the sign and simply stops, stands there, completely still. Over the next 43 minutes, more coyotes arrive. They come from different directions, appearing at the edge of camera range and walking directly to the spot beneath the sign. Each one displays the same behavior: approach, stop, stand motionless. They don't interact with each other, don't show any signs of aggression or fear, just converge on this specific location and freeze. By 12:35 a.m., 43 coyotes are standing in a group beneath the ranch sign. The footage shows them all motionless, not pacing, not looking around, just standing in absolute stillness in a formation that's becoming increasingly organized and dense. Then, at 12:41 a.m., something happens that the review team watched repeatedly, trying to understand. All the coyotes collapse simultaneously, not gradually, not in sequence, all at once, as if someone had cut their strings. They drop to the ground in perfect synchronization. And here's what makes it impossible. There's no visible cause, no flash of light, no sound on the audio track, no object entering frame. They simply all fall at exactly the same moment. Dr. Travis Taylor analyzed this footage frame by frame. His observation: the synchronization is too perfect to be coincidental. We're talking about 43 individual animals dropping within the same half-second window. The probability of that happening randomly approaches zero. Something caused this, something that affected all of them simultaneously. And whatever it was, it's not visible on our camera systems. The footage continues for another 6 hours until dawn. During that entire time, nothing approaches the pile. No scavengers, no other coyotes, no wildlife at all. The area is completely avoided by every other animal species, as if they could sense something wrong with the location. That avoidance behavior continued for 3 days after the bodies were removed. But there's one more detail in the footage that investigators found deeply unsettling. At 3:17 a.m., approximately 3 hours after the coyotes collapsed, there's a brief electromagnetic interference spike on all camera feeds. The image pixelates for about 4 seconds. When the feeds clear, the coyote bodies have been rearranged into the neat pile that was discovered at dawn. Something moved 43 dead coyotes into an organized configuration during those 4 seconds of interference. And there's no visible evidence of what did the moving. 6 coyote carcasses were transported to a veterinary pathology facility in Salt Lake City for comprehensive necropsy. The team conducting the examinations included 2 board-certified veterinary pathologists and a wildlife disease specialist. They approached the autopsies expecting to find poisoning, disease, or some other identifiable cause of death. What they found instead was medical impossibility. The external examination revealed no trauma whatsoever. No wounds, no bruising, no broken bones, no signs of struggle. The animals appeared physically pristine, except for being dead. Internal examination showed all major organs present and, bizarrely, appearing normal. Heart, lungs, liver, kidneys, all looked healthy on gross examination. But tissue samples told a different story. Under microscopic examination, cells throughout the coyotes' bodies showed signs of catastrophic failure. Not gradual degradation like you'd see in disease or poisoning. Instant cellular death, as if every cell in their bodies had simultaneously stopped functioning. One pathologist described it as looking like the animals had been switched off at a cellular level. Toxicology screening found no poisons, no drugs, no environmental toxins. Blood chemistry was normal except for elevated stress hormones, suggesting the animals experienced extreme fear immediately before death. But there was no identifiable cause for that fear response, and stress alone doesn't cause instantaneous death in healthy animals. Dr. Travis Taylor attended the necropsy presentations and asked pointed questions about the cellular damage patterns. Could radiation cause this? Answer: no. The damage pattern was wrong and there was no radiation detected. Could electromagnetic pulse cause this? Answer: theoretically possible, but would require field strength that would have fried all the ranch's electronic equipment. Could sound frequency cause this? Answer: unlikely, and no unusual acoustic signatures were detected on the overnight recordings. The pathology team's official report concluded, cause of death cannot be determined through conventional veterinary pathology. The cellular damage observed is inconsistent with any known natural or man-made agent. This conclusion, essentially admitting that medical science couldn't explain how these animals died, was unprecedented in the pathologists' combined 40 years of experience. One additional finding troubled everyone involved. Brain tissue examination showed unusual activity patterns in the neurons, specifically in areas associated with fear response and motor control. The patterns suggested the animals had been experiencing intense terror and had simultaneously lost voluntary muscle control. They were conscious and terrified, but unable to flee, and then something killed them all at once. The mass coyote death triggered involvement from multiple government agencies. Utah Division of Wildlife Resources sent field investigators. The USDA's Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service dispatched disease specialists. Even the FBI's liaison for unusual incidents in federal territories made inquiries, given Skinwalker Ranch's proximity to restricted airspace and government installations. Wildlife officials initially suspected poisoning, possibly from illegal predator control efforts by neighboring ranchers, but field investigation found no evidence of bait stations, no toxins in soil samples, and testing of the carcasses ruled out all common and uncommon poisons. The hypothesis was quickly abandoned. Disease was the next avenue of investigation. The CDC was consulted about potential novel pathogens. Rabies, distemper, and other known wildlife diseases were ruled out through testing. The pathology findings of instant cellular death didn't match any known disease progression, and the fact that no other wildlife in the area showed any signs of illness eliminated epidemic explanations. Environmental factors were examined extensively. Electromagnetic anomalies, radiation, toxic gas seepage, infrasound. Every measurable environmental variable was tested, and nothing abnormal was detected except during that brief 4-second window of camera interference when the bodies were rearranged. And nothing abnormal was detected except during that brief 4-second window of camera interference when the bodies were rearranged. And that anomaly itself couldn't be characterized beyond electromagnetic disturbance of unknown origin. After 3 weeks of investigation, a confidential briefing was held involving representatives from multiple agencies and the Skinwalker Ranch research team. According to sources present at that meeting, the discussion became heated when conventional explanations were exhausted. The evidence pointed to something that standard investigative frameworks couldn't accommodate. The decision to label the incident as potentially paranormal in origin came from that meeting. Not an official public statement, but internal classification used in government documentation. The terminology used was anomalous mass mortality event with characteristics suggesting non-natural causation. In government bureaucracy, that phrasing is as close as agencies get to saying paranormal without using the word. Dr. Travis Taylor attended portions of that that briefing and later stated, "When federal investigators, people who approach everything from a position of scientific skepticism, start using language that essentially acknowledges paranormal possibilities, you know the evidence has forced them into uncomfortable territory. These aren't people who believe in ghosts or UFOs by default, but they looked at the data and couldn't provide conventional explanations." The official public statement from Utah Wildlife Resources was carefully worded, "We investigated a mass mortality event involving coyotes at a private property. Cause of death could not be definitively established. The incident appears to be isolated and does not pose risk to public health or other wildlife." That bland statement concealed the extraordinary reality of what investigators had found, or more accurately, what they'd failed to find any normal explanation for. The coyote incident wasn't the first mass animal event at Skinwalker Ranch, but it was the largest and best documented. The property has a history of cattle mutilations, mysterious livestock deaths, and wildlife behaving in impossible ways. But this incident, with 43 coyotes simultaneously dying for no determinable medical reason, represented a significant escalation in both scale and strangeness. Dr. Travis Taylor and the research team began comparing the coyote incident to previous animal-related phenomena at the ranch. Patterns emerged. The incidents tend to occur in specific areas of the property. They often happen during periods of increased electromagnetic activity. They frequently involve behavior that violates known animal psychology. Animals approaching locations they should instinctively avoid, showing no fear response when they should flee, converging in groups when they should be solitary. Previous cattle mutilations showed similar impossible characteristics: surgical precision without tool marks, complete blood drainage without evidence of how it was removed, organs extracted without disturbing surrounding tissue. The coyote pile represented a different manifestation of the same underlying pattern. Whatever affects this property can interact with living creatures in ways that violate biological and physical laws. Taylor developed a hypothesis, though he emphasized it was highly speculative. What if the phenomena at Skinwalker Ranch can exert some kind of control over biological systems? Not just observation, which is what we see with the orbs and aerial phenomena, but actual influence over living things. The coyotes all arriving at the same location, standing motionless, dying simultaneously. That suggests external control at a neurological level. This hypothesis is disturbing because it implies intelligence and capability far beyond simple observation. If something at Skinwalker Ranch can compel animals to gather, paralyze them, kill them simultaneously, and then arrange their bodies, what does that mean for human safety? The ranch has had hundreds of visitors over the years. People work there daily. If the phenomena wanted to affect humans the way it apparently affected those coyotes, could it? Brandon Fugel, the ranch's owner, addressed this concern publicly. "We take safety extremely seriously. We have protocols. We monitor constantly, and we've never had a human injury related to paranormal activity. But I'll be honest, the coyote incident made us reconsider our understanding of what we're dealing with. This isn't just lights in the sky or equipment malfunctions. This is something that can affect living biology in profound ways." The pattern recognition extended beyond animal incidents. The electromagnetic interference that occurred when the coyote bodies were rearranged matched signatures from previous incidents where objects moved or equipment failed. The timing, always during overnight hours between midnight and 4 a.m., aligned with peak activity periods documented over years of monitoring. The location, directly beneath the ranch entrance sign, was symbolic in a way that suggested intentional messaging. Taylor's conclusion: whatever is happening at Skinwalker Ranch isn't random. It follows patterns. It seems to have preferences for certain locations and times. It responds to human presence and investigation. And critically, it appears to be escalating. The phenomena are becoming more dramatic, more frequent, and harder to dismiss as misidentification or equipment error. The coyote pile represents a threshold moment where denying intelligent causation becomes more difficult than accepting. When conventional explanations fail, speculation begins. Scientists, researchers, and paranormal investigators have proposed multiple theories about what could cause the type of mass mortality seen in the coyote incident. None are satisfying. All raise more questions than they answer. Theory 1. Advanced directed energy weapon. Some speculate that military testing of classified technology could explain the incident. A weapon system capable of targeting biological systems, inducing cardiac arrest or neurological shutdown from a distance. But this theory has problems. Why would military testing occur at a private ranch? Why would the government allow investigations if they were responsible? And what kind of weapon arranges bodies after killing? Theory 2. Electromagnetic anomaly of natural origin. Utah's geology includes unusual mineral deposits and underground formations that could theoretically produce electromagnetic effects. But Dr. Travis Taylor addressed this directly. We've surveyed this property extensively with ground-penetrating radar and electromagnetic sensors. Yes, there are geological features. No, none of them explain synchronized biological shutdown of 43 animals. Natural EM fields don't work that way. Theory 3. Infrasound or ultrasound frequencies. Certain sound frequencies can affect animal behavior and potentially induce fear or disorientation. Some researchers propose that underground geological activity or equipment malfunction could have produced frequencies that affected the coyotes, but acoustic analysis of the overnight recordings showed no unusual sound signatures, and sound frequency doesn't explain the pile arrangement. Theory 4. Paranormal entity or intelligence. This is where the speculation becomes uncomfortable for scientifically minded researchers. The theory suggests that Skinwalker Ranch is inhabited by or attracts some form of non-human intelligence capable of affecting physical reality. The coyotes were compelled to gather, paralyzed through unknown means, killed simultaneously, and their bodies arranged as either a message or a territorial display. Dr. Travis Taylor, when pressed on which theory he found most plausible, gave a careful response. I'm a scientist. I deal in evidence and testable hypotheses, but I'm also honest about what the evidence shows. We have documented phenomena that don't fit conventional frameworks. The electromagnetic signatures, the synchronized biological effects, the apparent intelligence behind the arrangement. All of this points to something we don't understand operating by rules we haven't discovered. Whether you call that paranormal or just extremely advanced unknown technology, the practical result is the same. We're dealing with something beyond current scientific explanation. Theory 5. Interdimensional or quantum effects. Some physicists consulting on Skinwalker Ranch investigations have proposed that the property might be experiencing effects from quantum phenomena or even interdimensional bleed-through. This theory suggests that what we perceive as paranormal activity is actually natural physics, operating at scales or in ways we don't yet understand. The coyotes might have been affected by localized alterations in space-time or quantum field fluctuations. Each theory attempts to bridge the gap between documented evidence and possible explanation, but they all share a common problem. They require accepting that something extraordinary is occurring. Whether it's classified military technology, unknown natural phenomena, non-human intelligence, or exotic physics, any explanation for the coyote incident forces us to acknowledge that our understanding of reality is incomplete. And for most people, that's more disturbing than any specific theory. Something happened at Skinwalker Ranch that nobody is talking about. The cameras stopped rolling. Experiments that had been running for months were suddenly halted. Crew schedules were wiped clean, and the silence that followed wasn't the comfortable quiet of a production break. It was the heavy silence of something gone terribly wrong. The timeline is crucial to understanding what happened. In late spring of last year, production was in full swing. The team had scheduled a series of experiments designed to test a hypothesis they'd been developing over multiple seasons, that specific locations on the ranch responded to electromagnetic stimulation in ways that suggested intelligence or at least complex reactive systems. Camera crews were on site daily. Travis Taylor and the scientific team were running constant tests. Eric Bard was analyzing data streams in real time. Dragon, the ranch's security chief, was monitoring the perimeter. Everything was normal. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon in early June, everything changed. Filming stopped mid-experiment. Not paused, stopped. Equipment was powered down. The crew was sent home, and the official explanation was deliberately vague. Technical difficulties requiring assessment. But here's what made people suspicious. Production crews know the difference between a normal pause and an emergency shutdown. In normal circumstances, you finish the day's shoot, wrap equipment properly, schedule the next session. This was different. Sources close to the production describe it as abrupt. One moment cameras were rolling, the next everyone was being asked to leave immediately. Experiments that had taken weeks to set up were abandoned mid-process. The crew schedules tell the story. Up until that Tuesday, every day for the following month was blocked for filming. By Wednesday morning, those schedules were completely cleared. No explanations, no new dates, just blank calendars and a memo about indefinite postponement pending further review. People who'd worked in television production for decades said they'd never seen anything quite like it. The speed, the totality, the lack of communication. Perhaps most telling was the simultaneous silence from everyone involved. Travis Taylor, who regularly engaged with fans on social media, went quiet about ranch activities. Brandon Fugel, the ranch's owner who'd been open about experiments, stopped discussing current investigations. Crew members who used to share behind-the-scenes photos suddenly posted nothing from the ranch. It was coordinated, deliberate, the kind of silence that comes with NDAS and serious legal implications. This wasn't planned downtime. Production breaks are announced. Seasonal gaps are expected. This was something else entirely. A full stop in the middle of active investigation, leaving equipment in place and experiments unfinished. Whatever happened that Tuesday didn't just pause the show. It changed the entire trajectory of how the ranch would be investigated going forward. The experiment that preceded the shutdown was relatively routine by Skinwalker Ranch standards. The team was conducting electromagnetic testing in an area known for high strangeness, using a combination of RF spectrum analyzers, magnetometers, and high-speed cameras. They'd done similar tests dozens of times. This should have been unremarkable. What made this different was the consistency of the anomaly. In past experiments, strange readings would appear briefly, spike, then disappear. Interesting, but inconclusive. This time, multiple instruments detected the same phenomenon simultaneously, not just one sensor malfunctioning or picking up interference. Every piece of equipment, calibrated independently, registered identical anomalies at precisely the same time. According to sources familiar with the data, the readings didn't match any known category. It wasn't standard electromagnetic interference from power lines or radio towers. The signature was completely different. It wasn't geological activity. Seismographs showed no corresponding movement. It wasn't atmospheric. Weather conditions were stable. And it wasn't equipment failure, because once they swapped in backup instruments, the readings continued unchanged. But here's what really disturbed the team. The anomaly had structure. It wasn't random noise or chaotic signals. It showed patterns. Repetition, sequences that suggested organization. One researcher, speaking anonymously, described it as looking less like natural phenomena and more like data transmission, as if something was broadcasting on frequencies they happened to be monitoring. The data was concerning because it didn't fit into comfortable categories. UAPs can be explained away as misidentified aircraft or atmospheric phenomena. Geological anomalies can be attributed to unique mineral compositions or underground structures. Electromagnetic interference can be blamed on equipment or distant sources, but data showing clear structure, perfect synchronization across multiple independent systems, and patterns that suggested intentional organization, that was something different entirely. This wasn't interesting data that would make for a compelling episode. This was concerning data that made scientists stop and reconsider whether they should be conducting these experiments at all. Because if something was responding to their tests, if something was broadcasting back, then the fundamental assumption underlying the investigation was wrong. They weren't just observing passive phenomena. They were interacting with something active. The data review session that followed the experiment revealed something that shouldn't have been possible. Conflicting readings that violated basic physics were appearing simultaneously. Instruments detecting electromagnetic fields in ranges that should have required massive power sources, yet thermal imaging showed no heat signatures. Radiation detectors registering particles that left no trace on film or digital sensors. Audio equipment picking up frequencies below human hearing range, but sound pressure meters showing no corresponding waves. Scientists on the team started using a term they'd avoided throughout the entire investigation: impossible. Not unlikely, not unexplained, impossible, because the data sets were mutually exclusive. If instrument A was correct, instrument B's readings couldn't exist. If instrument B was functioning properly, instrument A's data violated known laws. Yet both were calibrated correctly, both were functioning as designed, and both were recording contradictory realities. Then came the detail that made everyone stop talking and start genuinely worrying. The signals didn't stop when they shut down the equipment. Standard protocol after capturing interesting data is to power everything down, verify the anomaly disappears, then power back up to see if it returns. This helps eliminate the possibility that your own equipment is creating the phenomena you're trying to measure. They shut down every piece of electronic equipment on the ranch. Generators, computers, sensors, everything. The baseline readings should have dropped to near zero. Instead, the signal persisted. Not as strong, but definitely present, which meant whatever they were detecting existed independent of their observation. It was there whether they were measuring it or not. And somehow, impossibly, their instruments were still detecting it even when powered off. But the truly disturbing realization came when they analyzed the pattern over time. The signal wasn't random, it wasn't consistent, it was adaptive. During the first hour of testing, it appeared in one frequency range. When they focused their instruments on that range, it shifted to another. When they broadened their monitoring, it split across multiple frequencies. It was as if something was testing their capabilities, learning what they could detect, adjusting its behavior accordingly. This crossed a fundamental line in scientific investigation. You can study phenomena that don't understand they're being studied. Weather doesn't know you're measuring it. Geological formations don't care about your seismographs. But if something is responding to observation, if it's adjusting behavior based on how you're measuring it, then you're not conducting passive research anymore. You're engaged in an interaction, and interactions can go both ways. Before this experiment, safety concerns at Skinwalker Ranch focused on practical matters. Don't stand under the drilling rig. Wear protective equipment during rocket launches. Maintain safe distances from high-powered laser and RF equipment. Standard industrial safety protocols for the kind of testing they were conducting. But after this data came back, the conversation about safety changed fundamentally. Medical monitoring of team members had been routine throughout the investigation. Blood work, basic physicals, standard stuff to ensure nothing on the ranch was causing obvious health problems. But in the days following this particular experiment, several team members reported symptoms that couldn't be easily explained. Severe headaches that lasted for days, sleep disruption, vivid dreams that multiple people described in eerily similar terms, a general sense of unease that persisted even after leaving the property. One researcher described it as feeling watched, even at home, hundreds of miles from the ranch. Another reported technology malfunctions that started after the experiment. Phones dying randomly, computers crashing, electrical systems in his house behaving strangely. Were these symptoms connected to the experiment, psychosomatic responses to fear, or something else? The team couldn't say with certainty, and that uncertainty was itself concerning. Dr. Travis Taylor, who'd been advocating for increasingly aggressive testing to provoke responses, suddenly started talking about protocols and caution. Sources say he had conversations with Brandon Fugel about whether they were exposing the team to something they didn't understand and couldn't protect against. Not physical danger. You can wear protective gear and maintain safe distances. But psychological or neurological effects that might not show up on standard medical tests. The phrase that kept coming up in internal discussions was informed consent. Everyone on the team had agreed to investigate strange phenomena. They'd signed waivers acknowledging physical risks, but nobody had consented to exposure to something that might affect consciousness or cognition in ways medical science couldn't predict or treat. How do you get informed consent when neither you nor your subjects understand what you're dealing with? This was the moment when the investigation stopped being about discovery and became about exposure, about whether pushing for answers was worth potential harm to the people doing the pushing, and critically, about whether continuing to provoke responses was making things worse. Because if the phenomena could adapt, if it could respond, if it could somehow affect people even after they left the property, then every experiment wasn't just gathering data. It was escalating an interaction that nobody fully understood. Anyone who's watched the show closely over multiple seasons can see the shift. Certain locations on the ranch that were featured prominently in early episodes quietly disappeared from later investigations. Not because they stopped being interesting, because they became too concerning to continue studying with cameras rolling and crew members present. One area in particular, a section near the East Field, was the focus of intense investigation in the first 2 seasons. High radiation readings, strange lights, equipment malfunctions, classic Skinwalker Ranch phenomena. Then, after a specific incident that was filmed but never aired, that zone was quietly removed from the rotation. Experiments started happening everywhere else on the property. That particular location stopped appearing in episodes. The official explanation when fans noticed was simple. They were exploring other areas of the ranch to get more comprehensive data. But people familiar with the production tell a different story. After the incident, a decision was made at the highest levels that this area would be monitored remotely only. No personnel on site during active phenomena, no film crews. The zone wasn't abandoned because it was uninteresting. It was cordoned off because it was too active. What makes avoidance revealing is context. Throughout the show's run, the team has deliberately put themselves in uncomfortable situations, flying helicopters in areas known for equipment failure, digging in zones with radiation concerns, conducting experiments that they knew might trigger reactions. These aren't people who scare easily or avoid risk. So when they collectively decide that a location is off limits for direct investigation, it tells you something significant happened there. Sources describe the incident that led to the decision as a near miss, not physical danger in the traditional sense. No one was injured, but something happened during filming that made everyone present extremely uncomfortable. Multiple crew members refused to return to that specific area. Insurance concerns were raised, and Brandon Fugel made the call that whatever data they might gather wasn't worth the risk to personnel. The lesson here is important. Some areas aren't off limits because they're empty or explained away. They're restricted because they're too full of activity that nobody wants to interact with up close anymore. Observation from a distance is one thing. Direct exposure is something else entirely. And the decision to maintain distance after years of aggressive investigation speaks volumes about what they experienced in that zone. One of the strangest aspects of the shutdown involves the delayed reaction to footage. During filming, everyone on site was focused on equipment, data streams, and immediate observations. The atmosphere was professional, scientific, controlled. Yes, strange things happened, but in the moment, with cameras rolling and a job to do, people stayed focused on documentation. The unease came later, during the review sessions when editors started going through raw footage frame by frame, when producers watched everything that had been captured without the distraction of being on site. That's when people started seeing things that nobody noticed during actual filming. Details in the background, patterns in the data visualizations, sequences that didn't make sense when viewed in isolation but became disturbing when seen in context. One editor described the experience as watching something change the longer you looked at it. He'd review a segment, mark it for inclusion, then come back to it hours later and see something different. Not literally different, the footage hadn't changed, but his perception of what was happening in the frame had shifted. Details that seemed insignificant during the first viewing became prominent. Patterns emerged that he couldn't unsee once noticed. Multiple crew members reported that reviewing footage affected them more than being on the ranch during filming, which doesn't make logical sense. You'd think direct exposure would be more impactful than watching recorded video in a comfortable editing bay. But the repeated viewing, the ability to pause and examine frames, the process of trying to understand what they'd captured, that's what got under people's skin. Then came the reports from people who worked on the footage off-site, away from the ranch entirely. Editors in Los Angeles, color correction specialists in New York, sound designers who never set foot in Utah. They started reporting strange experiences, dreams about the ranch, a sense of being observed while working on specific segments, technology problems that seemed concentrated around footage from particular experiments. This is where things get genuinely unsettling. If phenomena could somehow extend beyond the physical location through recorded media, then documentation wasn't a safe distance observation anymore. It was a vector. Every copy of the footage, every hard drive, every review session, potentially extending whatever was happening at the ranch to people who'd never been there. The real shock didn't come from being present during the experiments. It came from trying to understand what had been captured afterward. Networks shut down productions for predictable reasons. Budget overruns, declining ratings, cast conflicts, safety violations, standard entertainment industry issues that happen all the time and get resolved through normal business processes. What happened with Skinwalker Ranch wasn't any of those things. The show was profitable, ratings were strong, the team worked well together. By every conventional metric, production should have continued. But there's a difference between a ratings problem and a liability problem. Ratings can be fixed with better marketing or format changes. Liability issues, especially ones involving crew health and safety, require immediate action and careful legal review. When multiple people start reporting psychological effects, when medical concerns arise, when insurance companies start asking questions, that's when network executives get involved directly. Sources within the network describe a series of high-level meetings that happened in the days following the shutdown. Legal teams were consulted, insurance carriers were notified, medical professionals were brought in to evaluate crew members. This wasn't creative executives discussing storylines. This was risk management trying to understand potential exposure and liability. The decision to pause production came from above the show's production team. Brandon Fugel owns the ranch and could have continued private investigations. The core team wanted to keep working. But when a network's corporate structure gets involved, when lawyers start reviewing what happened rather than producers, that signals a fundamental shift from entertainment concerns to legal and safety concerns. What makes this shutdown different from past controversies or production problems is the speed and completeness. Past issues with paranormal shows have led to format changes or cast replacements. This led to a full stop. No announcements about retooling, no statements about when filming might resume, just vague mentions of technical issues and ongoing assessment, the kind of corporate language that indicates serious concerns being discussed privately while public statements remain deliberately uninformative. Someone higher up decided this shouldn't continue, at least not in its current form. Whether that decision was driven by genuine concern for crew safety, fear of legal liability, or something else entirely, we may never know. But the fact that it happened, that a successful show with strong ratings was shut down mid-season without clear explanation, tells you everything about how seriously this situation was taken at the highest corporate levels. Every reality show captures far more footage than ever makes it to air. For every hour of television, you might shoot 30 or 40 hours of raw material. Most of what gets cut is boring. Equipment setup, failed takes, conversations that don't advance the narrative. But sometimes footage gets cut for other reasons. Because it doesn't fit the show's format, because it raises questions the producers can't answer, because it's too ambiguous to include but too clear to completely dismiss. Skinwalker Ranch has an archive of footage that was never meant to be aired, experiments that produced results too strange to contextualize in a television format, moments where equipment behaved in ways that suggested either massive technical failure or phenomena beyond current explanation, crew reactions that were too genuine, too unsettled to fit the show's somewhat measured scientific tone. One particular piece of footage, described by multiple sources but never publicly released, shows an experiment where everything went wrong at once. Multiple equipment failures, data streams contradicting each other in real time, and in the background, something visible on thermal cameras that shouldn't have been there. Not a person, not an animal, something that registered heat in patterns that didn't match any known biological signature. The footage was reviewed extensively, enhanced, analyzed by multiple experts. The consensus was that it showed something real, something physical enough to register on multiple sensors, but what it showed couldn't be easily explained. It wasn't clear enough to definitively prove anything extraordinary, but it was too clear to dismiss as equipment malfunction or misidentification. It existed in the uncomfortable middle ground where debunking fails but proof remains elusive. The decision was made to keep this footage in the vault, not because it was boring or irrelevant, because silence can be a form of containment. If you can't explain something and you can't debunk it, sometimes the safest option is to not show it at all. Let people speculate about what might have been captured rather than giving them actual footage that raises more questions than it answers. This is where the shutdown becomes most interesting from a disclosure perspective. Everything that aired on the show was carefully curated to be compelling but ultimately explainable within the show's framework. Mysterious but not definitively proven. The footage that never aired, that sits in archives under legal protection and non-disclosure agreements, that might tell a very different story. Not everything is debunked by science and skepticism. Some things are simply buried because they don't fit into comfortable narratives about what's possible. The question everyone asks is whether the ranch is still active without cameras, whether experiments continue privately, whether the phenomena that made Skinwalker Ranch famous persist when nobody is watching or documenting. The answer, based on everything we can piece together, is yes. Activity continues, investigation continues, but the nature of how it's being studied has fundamentally changed. Brandon Fugel has made it clear the ranch remains a focus of serious scientific investigation, but that investigation is happening differently now. More remote monitoring, more automated data collection, less direct human presence during active phenomena. The shift suggests lessons learned from whatever led to the shutdown. That proximity to certain events carries risks that can be mitigated through distance and technological intermediation. The patterns observed over years of investigation suggest that whatever happens at Skinwalker Ranch doesn't depend on human observation. The phenomena existed before the show. They'll exist after. Cameras and scientific instruments might make the events visible and documentable, but they don't create them, which raises an uncomfortable question. If filming stops but activity continues, what was the investigation actually accomplishing besides documentation? Some researchers argue that aggressive investigation, deliberately provoking responses, attempting to trigger phenomena through experimentation, might have escalated whatever exists there. That each rocket launch, each drilling operation, each electromagnetic pulse wasn't just observing passive phenomena, but actively engaging with something responsive, and that engagement potentially made things worse. The shutdown might represent a recognition that the paradigm was wrong. You can't treat intelligent, responsive phenomena like laboratory subjects. You can't provoke and measure something that might be measuring you back. The scientific method works beautifully for studying things that don't know they're being studied. It becomes problematic when the subject of investigation is aware of the observer and potentially capable of responding in ways that affect the observer. Looking forward, Skinwalker Ranch will likely remain an active research site, but the research will be more cautious, more respectful of boundaries that weren't clear until they were crossed, less focused on making compelling television, and more concerned with understanding phenomena without unnecessarily escalating interaction. Because the ultimate lesson of the shutdown is simple. Stopping observation doesn't stop activity, but it might stop whatever consequences come from aggressive investigation of things we don't yet understand.
Something strange is happening at Skinwalker Ranch, and tonight, its owner, Brandon Fugel, is finally breaking the silence. For years, the world has watched unexplained lights, radiation spikes, and technology failures play out on television. But now, Brandon claims the public hasn't seen even half of what's really going on. In a sudden announcement, he reveals new evidence, government pressure, and a discovery beneath the mesa that changes everything we thought we knew about the ranch. And if what he's saying is true, then someone has been trying to keep this hidden for a very long time. Subscribe, because this story is just beginning. When Brandon Fugel agreed to a late-night interview on a small independent live-stream channel, nobody expected anything unusual. He'd done hundreds of interviews over the years, always measured, always careful, always respectful of non-disclosure agreements. But on this night, something was different. His voice was tense, his posture stiff, and behind him, viewers noticed something unsettling. The blinds in his office were pulled shut, and two security guards stood just barely visible in the reflection of the glass. Before the host could finish asking the first question, Brandon leaned forward and interrupted. "There are things happening on the ranch we were never meant to understand," he said. His tone carried none of the scientific detachment he'd become known for. "And we've been told to stop digging." Literally, chat messages exploded across the screen. More than 80,000 people tuned in within minutes. Brandon then recounted an event from earlier that month, an excavation near the southern ridge of the mesa. The team had noticed recurring spikes of ionizing radiation, the same kind that had hospitalized crew members in previous seasons. But this time, there was something else. A geometric pattern carved into stone 8 feet below the surface. It wasn't modern tool work, it wasn't erosion, it had symmetry. He paused, swallowing hard. "We transmitted the data to one of our government consultants. They told us to close the site immediately and destroy the documentation." The host blinked in disbelief. Brandon continued. "When we refused, 3 unmarked helicopters flew over the ranch. No transponders, no flight plans. That's not paranoia, that's a violation." He lifted his phone and held it toward the camera. On the screen was a blurry image, a perfectly smooth circular cavity beneath the mesa, surrounded by smaller chambers. "We scanned this cavern. Something metallic is inside," he whispered. The audience went silent. Then he dropped the sentence that would trend worldwide within hours. "We didn't discover it. Something placed it there." For the first time, Brandon wasn't smiling. He wasn't selling a mystery. He was warning us. In the days following that interview, speculation spread across the internet, but nothing compared to the information Brandon quietly shared with his research team behind closed doors. The object beneath the mesa wasn't just metallic. According to preliminary scans, its alloy composition didn't match any known industrial signature. It reflected electromagnetic pulses in a way that suggested it was designed to be found, but not easily understood. The team scheduled a controlled descent into the cavern. When technicians lowered sensors through a stabilized borehole, the instruments behaved erratically. Cameras glitched, thermal readings inverted from cold to blistering heat in seconds. And for a brief moment, a deep humming vibration rattled the equipment. One of the monitors, usually full of static, flashed a smooth outline, like a sphere inside a cradle. Then, everything went dark. Brandon ordered all gear retrieved immediately. One technician who had been tethered near the borehole surface complained of dizziness. Within hours, his skin reddened and his hair began to fall out in patches. Radiation sickness again, but this time faster, sharper. Unlike any profile the medical team recognized, the object wasn't dormant, it was interacting. That evening, Brandon contacted a federal liaison he'd worked with since the ranch went public. The response was curt: cease all penetration of the mesa and await further instruction. Hours later, the ranch's perimeter sensors detected movement. 2 unmarked SUVs idling near the property line. The drivers remained inside, headlights off, cameras pointed toward the gate. As word spread among the staff, fear took root. This wasn't like the usual UFO sightings or cattle anomalies. This was tactical interest. Someone, somewhere, knew exactly what lay under that stone. "We're not supposed to be digging here," Brandon told his lead physicist. "But If we walk away now, we may never know who built it or why it's responding. That night, as the team reviewed the corrupted footage frame by frame, they noticed something impossible. During the static blur, the sphere appeared to move, not physically rolling, but shifting orientation, like an eye turning toward a sound. The room fell silent. For the first time, Brandon wondered if the ranch wasn't protecting a secret, but guarding humanity from it. Within 48 hours of the failed borehole scan, Brandon's inbox filled with messages from agencies he'd never directly interacted with before. They weren't threats, at least not on paper. Instead, they were offers, grants, funding opportunities, partnership programs, all designed to shift control of the research to federal oversight. Every document had the same concerning clause: full custody of all recovered materials. Brandon refused them all. That's when the phones started acting strange. Calls dropped mid-sentence. Texts arrived hours late. Ranch servers logged intrusion attempts from encrypted networks bouncing across continents. "Someone's probing our systems," their cybersecurity consultant muttered, tapping through logs with shaking hands. "They're not learning who we are. They're learning where we're weakest." Meanwhile, activity on the ranch intensified. At 2:13 a.m., motion sensors positioned along the northern fence triggered repeatedly. When security cameras rotated toward the alert, they captured figures, 3 of them, standing perfectly still beyond the property line. Their height, posture, and proportions looked wrong, too stiff, too symmetrical. After 15 seconds, they vanished behind a flash of static. The next morning, Brandon gathered his senior team. He played the footage without commentary. No one spoke. "We're being watched," astrophysicist Travis Taylor finally murmured, "and not just by people." Then came the seismic data. Sensors embedded across the mesa began detecting rhythmic pulses deep underground, consistent, timed vibrations occurring every 6 minutes. They weren't earthquakes, they were signals. When Brandon forwarded the readouts to a classified contact, the reply was chillingly short: "Stop transmitting data." Around this time, rumors began circulating among staff. Stories of ranch workers hearing voices echoing from the cavern during late-night spot checks. Whispers that seemed to speak directly into the mind without air or breath. A geologist reported feeling pressure in his skull, as if his thoughts were being pulled downward toward the mesa. He resigned the next morning. Brandon doubled security, but physical guards couldn't protect against what was happening next. The dreams. Nearly half the crew began waking in the night, sweating, claiming they'd seen a dark chamber with a sphere suspended in a pale blue glow. They described the same faint hum, the same vibration captured by instruments days earlier. Identical nightmares, shared imagery. "I've seen pattern correlation before," Brandon said quietly, pacing the command room, "but I've never seen shared cognition. Something is interacting with us, and it's choosing who." More than ever, the ranch felt alive, like it was studying them back. Behind the mesa, something hidden for centuries was stirring, and the world, without knowing it, was inching closer to awakening it fully. 3 days after the seismic pulses began, the ranch's airspace, normally quiet, became unusually active. Radar picked up a small aircraft circling the mesa at low altitude. It wasn't military, but it wasn't commercial either. The pilot ignored every attempt at radio contact. As Brandon and his security chief watched the feed, the plane banked sharply and descended. Cameras mounted on its underside aimed directly at the excavation site. Within seconds, alarms blared. The ranch's monitoring system detected a sudden spike in microwave radiation emanating from the cavern. The sphere beneath the mesa was reacting to the aircraft's presence. Then, without warning, the plane's lights flickered. Its engine cut out mid-air, and the craft drifted in a slow, controlled spiral before crashing safely into a field 2 miles away. No fire, no explosion. It was as if something guided it down. Federal vehicles arrived on scene before Brandon's team could reach the wreck. Agents sealed the site and confiscated all equipment. The pilot was escorted into an unmarked van and driven away. When Brandon pressed for information, he was told only that aviation protocols had been violated. No further explanation. The next morning, new signs appeared around the perimeter. Restricted flight zone, federal authority. Brandon hadn't requested them. The FAA claimed it was for wildlife preservation. But wildlife doesn't ground planes. That night, ranch instruments caught a faint electromagnetic whisper pulsing from the mesa toward the crash site, a signal too orderly to be natural. Someone or something was communicating, and for the first time, Brandon feared the message wasn't meant for humans at all. The following week tested the ranch more than any single phenomenon ever had. The crew, normally tight-knit and resilient, began to fracture under the strain of sleepless nights, whispering voices, and unexplained health issues. Tempers flared during simple discussions, and arguments erupted over equipment placement, lab access, even meal schedules. Everyone felt it. Something was pushing them. Travis reviewed biometric data from wearable sensors the team had been testing. Heart rates were spiking at random intervals, usually when staff passed directly above the cavern area. Brainwave scans showed brief bursts of activity in regions associated with fear response and dream recall. Whatever lay beneath the mesa wasn't just emitting radiation, it was interacting neurologically. Then there were the compass failures. Every analog compass on the ranch began drifting, pulling toward the same direction, the excavation site. Digital sensors mirrored the anomaly, suggesting a magnetic field shift underground. When geologists tried to model the readings, the simulation showed an impossible shape, like a rotating torus of magnetism forming a containment shell. During a closed-door meeting, Brandon addressed the team. "The ranch has always been strange," he said, "but this is targeted. It's influencing biology, psychology, and magnetism at the same time. Something wants to be noticed." One researcher abruptly stood. Her eyes were glassy, unfocused. "Or it wants to be left alone," she murmured. She left mid-meeting, packed her belongings, and drove away without waiting for her paycheck. As tensions grew, Brandon's trusted ranch manager quietly admitted something odd. Livestock near the mesa had stopped grazing and stood facing the rock formation for hours at a time, staring without blinking, like they were listening. Sleep deprivation hit next. Crew members reported jolting awake at exactly 3:11 a.m. every night. Security logs confirmed it. Motion cameras around the mesa pulsed with static at that exact time, down to the second. "You're all on edge," the government liaison said during a call. "Shut the site down." But when Brandon asked if the government had seen similar patterns elsewhere, the line went silent for a long, uneasy moment before the call disconnected. Late that same night, the ranch's surveillance tower detected movement on the mesa. In infrared, several humanoid heat signatures stood in a semicircle, facing the excavation. They didn't move. They didn't breathe. Their heat signatures weren't biological at all, more like faint electromagnetic outlines. When security teams approached, the figures faded into the rock itself. The next morning, Brandon made an announcement that stunned the crew. Despite escalating danger, despite government warnings, they would continue. "The world doesn't get smaller when you ignore it," he said. "It just gets darker." The team nodded quietly, but no one looked reassured. Whatever was buried beneath the mesa was changing them, and now the ranch itself seemed to be choosing sides. By the end of the week, the rhythmic seismic pulses had evolved into something more complex. The waveform was no longer a simple beat. It now fluctuated in patterns that resembled data transmission. When the team converted the frequencies into audible range, a low, trembling hum filled the command center. It wasn't random. It rose, fell, and paused with eerie precision, like a message waiting for a response. Their signal analyst isolated the pattern and compared it to Earth-based communications. The spacing didn't match radio chatter, Morse, or sonar, but one thing stood out. The pulses repeated every 42 minutes. Exactly. Nothing in nature keeps time that perfectly. Worse, the pulses intensified whenever a human approached the excavation site. Heart monitors spiked. EEG sensors lit up. It was reacting to proximity, almost like curiosity. One night, around 3:11 a.m., the same minute the crew kept waking, the sensors detected a new anomaly, a faint ticking sound beneath the stone. It resembled metal expanding under heat, but the temperature readings were unchanged. Brandon and his physicist exchanged glances. "It's adjusting," she whispered. The next morning, they attempted to respond by broadcasting a controlled tone back into the cavern. For a moment, the seismic pulses stopped completely. The ranch fell eerily silent. Cameras froze. The wind itself seemed to hold its breath. Then the sphere answered. The return pulse surged with enough force to fry 2 servers, and leave every screen flooded with black and white static. Embedded deep in the noise, someone caught a fragment of pattern, 6 repeating symbols outlined in geometric arcs. It wasn't language as we know it, but neither was it meaningless. As Brandon stared at the frozen frame, a chill ran across his shoulders. Whatever was down there wasn't just emitting signals, it was listening and learning. With the pulses escalating, Brandon authorized a second borehole, this time with a fiber optic camera small enough to slip through a crack in the stone chamber wall. The drill descended slowly, guided by precise telemetry, until it reached a hollow pocket beneath the mesa. The feed flickered to life. At first, all they saw was darkness. Then, the camera autofocused, and the chamber walls came into view. They were perfectly smooth, curved, and reflective, not like cave stone, but like polished alloy. Stranger still, the surfaces were etched with repeating hexagonal patterns, each glowing faintly with a pale blue phosphorescence. As the camera panned downward, the sphere appeared in the center of the chamber, suspended several inches off the floor. It hovered in silent defiance of gravity, rotating just enough to reveal engraved arcs that resembled orbital paths. Every rotation caused the chamber walls to pulse gently, as though in resonance. Suddenly, the live feed jittered. The camera lens fogged from the inside, as if something unseen exhaled. In the control room, temperature sensors spiked plus 10 degrees in seconds. Alarms screamed. Then they heard it, a whisper. It wasn't electronic interference or wind. It was a layered voice, 3 tones speaking simultaneously, forming no recognizable word. Yet every person felt instinctively that it was directed at them. One technician stumbled backward, clutching his chest as if gripped by panic. Another dropped to his knees, hands over his ears, though no external sound registered. The feed snapped to white static. When the screens stabilized, the sphere's blue glow had intensified. The walls now rippled with shifting patterns, reacting like a living membrane. The camera began to melt, literally, its metal casing dripping as if exposed to intense heat, though thermals recorded only mild warmth. Brandon ordered the drill retracted immediately. For the rest of the night, the chamber emitted a slow, rhythmic flash, visible through cracks in the mesa. It pulsed like a heartbeat. For the first time, the team realized something terrifying. They hadn't discovered an artifact. They had awakened a system. Shaken by the chamber's reaction, Brandon halted all drilling operations and ordered a full electromagnetic sweep of the ranch. That's when the readings spiked again, except this time, they didn't originate underground. 3 distinct signals were detected hovering above the mesa, triangular in formation, only visible on specialized radar. Cameras pointed skyward, captured nothing but an empty blue sky. Yet, the instruments screamed. When the team tried powering down certain sensors to reduce interference, something responded. Every device rebooted on its own. Tablets flashed unauthorized logins. Security gates opened and closed without input. It was as if the ranch's systems were being tested. Suddenly, the same whispering tone from the chamber returned, but now, through the radio array, layered voices speaking in modulation patterns. Dr. Taylor noted they resembled pulsed star maps. The pulses grew faster the longer the equipment remained disabled, like a warning. When power was restored, the signals faded. The implication was chilling. Whatever was underground did not want to be isolated. That night, ranch animals refused to approach the mesa. Camera traps showed their silhouettes pausing, staring into darkness, then backing away. The sphere beneath the rock chamber dimmed, as if going dormant. Brandon realized shutting everything down only provoked a reaction. Observing, not interfering, might be the only safe path. But then, something happened that forced his hand. At 3:14 a.m., the underground sensors activated on their own. The chamber pulsed bright enough to illuminate cracks in the mesa, visible from the valley below. Brandon knew secrecy was no longer possible, and so, in a controlled interview the next morning, he made his announcement. "We've confirmed a non-human technology below Skinwalker Ranch. For the safety of the public, we're no longer calling this a legend. We're calling it evidence." The world froze, and the ranch hummed quietly, as if listening.
Brandon Fugal has spent millions of dollars and years of his life trying to understand what is happening beneath Skinwalker Ranch. He has brought in physicists, aerospace engineers, government-connected scientists, and some of the most sophisticated detection equipment ever deployed at a private research site. He has watched his team get hurt, watched equipment fail without explanation, and watched the mesa resist every attempt to penetrate its secrets. But what the scientific team detected beneath the mesa during the most recent phase of investigation was something that none of their frameworks had prepared them for, something that moved, something that responded, something alive. And when Brandon Fugal saw the data, he shut it all down. If you are new here, subscribe now, because what is living beneath the mesa at Skinwalker Ranch changes everything the scientific team thought they were dealing with. To understand why the detection of life beneath the mesa at Skinwalker Ranch produced a response serious enough to shut down the entire operation, you first have to understand what the mesa is within the context of the ranch and why, across every phase of investigation the property has undergone, from the earliest NIDS research through the current Fugal-era scientific program, the mesa has always occupied a position at the absolute center of whatever is happening on that land. The mesa is not simply an elevated geological feature on the Skinwalker Ranch property. It is the focal point around which the most significant and the most inexplicable phenomena documented at the ranch have consistently organized themselves across decades of investigation by multiple independent research teams. The Sherman family, who owned the ranch during the period that first brought it to national attention, documented their most extreme and most disturbing experiences in proximity to the mesa. The NADS team that investigated the property in the late 1990s and early 2000s identified the mesa as the location producing the highest concentration of anomalous phenomena and dedicated significant investigative resources to understanding what was generating those phenomena without arriving at a satisfactory explanation. Every subsequent investigation team, including the current scientific program operating under Brandon Fugal's ownership, has found the mesa to be the location where the ranch's phenomena are most concentrated, most consistent, and most resistant to conventional explanation. The physical characteristics of the mesa have been studied extensively without producing a complete understanding of its geology or its composition. Ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted during the current investigation have produced returns suggesting structural anomalies beneath the mesa's surface that do not correspond to the expected geological profile of the region. Anomalies that the scientific team has discussed publicly in terms that acknowledge their existence without fully accounting for what produced them or what they contain. Drilling operations directed at the mesa have encountered resistance and equipment failure at depths and under conditions that the team's engineers cannot explain through conventional geological frameworks. The airspace above the mesa has produced more documented anomalous aerial phenomena than any other location on the ranch, and the physical effects on researchers who spend extended time in close proximity to the mesa, the health impacts, the equipment malfunctions, the psychological and physiological responses that the show has documented across multiple seasons are more pronounced and more severe in the mesa's vicinity than anywhere else on the property, all of which means that the detection of something alive beneath the mesa is not simply a new data point added to an existing investigation. It is the thing that every phase of Skinwalker Ranch investigation has been moving toward, the answer to the question that the mesa has been generating for decades, arriving in a form that nobody on the scientific team was prepared to receive. Understanding the significance of what the scientific team detected beneath the mesa requires understanding the program that produced the detection. Because the investigation Brandon Fugal has built at Skinwalker Ranch is not a television production using scientific aesthetics for dramatic effect. It is a genuine and substantially funded scientific research program that happens to be documented by a television production, and the distinction matters because it determines the credibility of everything the program produces, including the detection that shut the ranch down. When Brandon Fugal purchased Skinwalker Ranch in 2016 for $4.5 million, he brought to the property something that previous investigation phases had lacked: the combination of substantial private resources, genuine scientific credibility through his connections to the aerospace and technology industries, and a personal commitment to applying the most rigorous available scientific methodology to a set of phenomena that previous investigations had documented but not explained. The team he assembled reflects that commitment. Dr. Travis Taylor, whose background in astrophysics, optical science, and aerospace defense research provided the program with a level of scientific credentialing that no previous Skinwalker Ranch investigation had possessed, was the lead scientist for the program's most intensive investigative phases. The supporting scientific team included specialists in geology, physics, biology, chemistry, and electromagnetic phenomena, as well as engineers with backgrounds in defense and aerospace technology who brought both expertise and equipment to the investigation that would not otherwise have been available to a private research program of this kind. The equipment deployed at the ranch under Fugel's program represents a significant escalation from previous investigation phases. Ground-penetrating radar systems capable of imaging subsurface features at depths and resolutions not previously applied to the property, atmospheric monitoring equipment drawn from aerospace and defense applications, biological detection systems designed for field deployment in environments with complex and variable conditions, and a network of fixed and mobile sensors providing continuous monitoring of the property's electromagnetic, acoustic, and environmental conditions at a level of coverage and resolution that the NIDES program, operating with the technology of the late 1990s, could not have achieved. It is this program, built over years of sustained investment and scientific engagement, that produced the detection beneath the mesa. And it is the credibility of this program, established through seasons of documented scientific work at the ranch, that makes the shutdown Brandon Fugel ordered in response to that detection something that cannot be dismissed as a production decision or a dramatic narrative choice. The detection that changed everything at Skinwalker Ranch did not arrive as a single dramatic instrument reading or a single moment of equipment response. It arrived the way the most significant scientific findings typically arrive, as an accumulation of data from multiple independent systems that individually suggested something unusual and collectively pointed toward a conclusion that the scientific team found both compelling and deeply unsettling. The initial indication came from the ground-penetrating radar system that had been conducting ongoing subsurface surveys of the mesa as part of the investigation's long-term geological mapping program. A survey pass conducted during the most recent phase of investigation returned data showing a subsurface anomaly at a depth consistent with the structural irregularities documented in previous surveys, but with a characteristic that had not appeared in prior data. The anomaly was not static. The returns showed a feature that had changed position between successive survey passes, conducted at intervals that the geological team assessed as too short for any known geological process to account for the degree of positional change recorded. Something beneath the mesa had moved. The geological team's initial response was to treat the finding as an instrument artifact, a malfunction or calibration error in the survey equipment, and to run the survey again with recalibrated instruments before drawing any conclusions. The repeat surveys did not resolve the anomaly. They confirmed it, and they added detail that the initial pass had not captured. The moving feature was not uniform in its subsurface signature. It had a boundary, a defined edge that distinguished it from the surrounding geological material in a way that suggested an object or a mass rather than a fluid or gaseous pocket. And its movement between survey passes was not random. It had direction, and across multiple successive surveys, that direction was consistent, suggesting displacement along a trajectory rather than diffuse shifting in response to environmental pressure. When the radar findings were cross-referenced with data from the biological detection systems that had been operating continuously in the mesa's vicinity, the picture that emerged was one that the scientific team found genuinely difficult to process. The biological sensors had been recording environmental data throughout the period covered by the radar surveys. When that data was reviewed against the timeline of the subsurface anomaly's movements, correlations emerged that the team's scientists assessed as statistically significant. The biological sensor readings elevated during periods corresponding to the anomaly's detected movement, not slightly, substantially and repeatedly, across multiple instances in the data record, with a consistency that the team's statisticians found could not be attributed to coincidence or environmental noise. Something beneath the mesa was moving, and when it moved, the biological detection equipment responded as if something alive was responsible for the movement. The response of the Skinwalker Ranch scientific team to the data produced by the mesa detection was not immediate alarm or immediate shutdown. It was the methodical and disciplined process of scientists who have spent years operating in an environment that consistently produces data that resists explanation, and who have learned, through that experience, to subject anomalous findings to the most rigorous available scrutiny before drawing conclusions. The first response was verification. Every instrument that had contributed data to the anomalous finding was tested, recalibrated, and run through independent diagnostic assessment to rule out equipment malfunction as an explanation. The ground-penetrating radar system was checked against known reference targets to confirm its spatial accuracy and its positional consistency. The biological detection equipment was calibrated against known environmental inputs to establish that its elevated readings during the anomaly anomaly periods were not the product of instrument drift or environmental interference. The data processing and analysis pipeline was reviewed by the team's software and engineering specialists to confirm that the correlations identified between the radar data and the biological sensor data were not artifacts of the analytical method. The verification process took time and was conducted with a thoroughness that reflected both the seriousness of the finding and the scientific team's awareness that a conclusion of this magnitude required the complete elimination of conventional explanations before it could be taken seriously. When the verification process was complete, the conventional explanations had been eliminated. The anomaly was real. The movement was real. The correlation between the movement and the biological sensor response was real. What remained, after every instrument check and every analytical review, was data describing something beneath the mesa at Skinwalker Ranch that was moving with direction and consistency, and whose movement was accompanied by biological sensor responses that the team's scientists could not account for through any mechanism other than the presence of a living organism at the depth and location the radar data indicated. That conclusion was presented to Brandon Fugal. His response was immediate. He reviewed the data personally, asked the scientific team to walk him through their verification process, confirmed that the conventional explanations had been thoroughly excluded, and then made the decision that the data required. He shut the investigation down. The decision Brandon Fugal made when the scientific team presented him with the mesa detection data was not a simple decision, and understanding it fully requires understanding both what the data showed and what Brandon Fugal's relationship to the ranch, to the investigation, and to the responsibility of ownership actually is. Brandon Fugal is not a person who shuts things down easily or without substantial cause. He is a businessman of considerable success, accustomed to making decisions under conditions of uncertainty and to proceeding with complex and high-stakes endeavors when the evidence supports doing so. He purchased Skinwalker Ranch over the objections of people in his professional circle who thought the acquisition was irrational. He has continued to invest in its investigation through seasons of findings that raised more questions than they answered, and through personal experiences on the property that he has described as genuinely disturbing. He has watched members of his scientific team suffer health effects from their work at the ranch and has continued the investigation. He is not someone who stops because things are difficult or because the findings are uncomfortable. What the mesa detection data presented him with was something different from discomfort or difficulty. It presented him with a direct implication about what the investigation was dealing with beneath the mesa, an implication that changed the risk calculus for every person operating on the ranch in a fundamental way. If something alive is moving beneath the mesa at the depth and scale the data suggested, the investigation's existing safety protocols were built around an incomplete understanding of what those protocols needed to protect against. Every drilling operation directed at the mesa, every ground disturbance in its vicinity, every activity that had been conducted on the basis of an understanding of the mesa as a geological feature rather than a geological feature containing living presence needed to be reassessed against a different set of risk parameters. The shutdown was not a retreat. It was a recognition that the investigation had arrived at a threshold where proceeding without a fundamental reassessment of what was being dealt with and what precautions that dealing required would be irresponsible toward the people whose safety Brandon Fugal is responsible for. He shut it down because the data told him that what was beneath the mesa was not what the investigation had assumed, and that assuming incorrectly about what is beneath the mesa has consequences that the scientific team could not yet fully scope. The detection of life beneath the mesa at Skinwalker Ranch raises a question that the scientific community and the broader public interested in the ranch's phenomena will inevitably ask. How did every previous investigation of the property, across decades of research by multiple independent teams with access to the best available technology of their respective eras, miss something that the current program found? The answer to that question is not simple, and it is not flattering to the idea that the previous investigation phases were comprehensive in their scope or their methodology, but it is also not a reflection of incompetence or carelessness on the part of the researchers who conducted them. The NIDES program that investigated the ranch in the late 1990s and early 2000s was operating at the frontier of applied paranormal and anomalous phenomena research with the technology and the methodological frameworks available at that time. The ground-penetrating radar systems available to that program were less capable than the current program's equipment in their depth penetration, their spatial resolution, and their ability to detect subtle changes in subsurface features over time. The biological detection capabilities available to NIDS were not designed for the specific application of detecting biological presence at depth in a complex geological environment. The program documented extraordinary things. It established the foundational evidentiary record for the current investigation to build on, but it was not equipped to find what the current program found, and the absence of a finding is not evidence of an absence. The Sherman family, who preceded NIDS and whose experiences on the property remain the most visceral and the most personally documented in the ranch's recorded history, described encounters and phenomena that, in retrospect, are consistent with an active presence beneath the mesa in ways that were not recognized as such at the time because the framework for interpreting them in those terms did not exist. The cattle mutilations, the disappearances, the sense described by multiple family members of something beneath the ground that was aware of their presence on the surface. These experiences were documented as evidence of the ranch's anomalous character without being understood as potentially diagnostic of specifically biological subsurface presence. What the current program's detection did was not discover something that previous investigations failed to find. It developed the methodological capability to formally detect and document something that the ranch's own history had been pointing toward for decades. The implications of a confirmed living presence beneath the mesa at Skinwalker Ranch extend in multiple directions simultaneously, and none of those directions leads to a simple or comfortable destination. The scientific implications alone are significant enough to represent a fundamental challenge to the existing understanding of what can live where, at what depth, under what conditions, and with what relationship to the surface environment directly above it. The depth at which the detection data places the anomalous biological presence is not a depth at which any known organism of the implied scale is documented to exist in the geological context of the American interior. Known subterranean life at significant depth consists of microbial communities, insects, and small invertebrates occupying cave systems and groundwater environments, none of which produce the scale of biological sensor response or the subsurface displacement profile that the mesa detection data describes. Whatever is living beneath the mesa, if the scientific team's interpretation of the data is correct, is something that the existing biological and geological literature has no category for, and the absence of that category is not a minor gap. It is a hole in the scientific understanding of what is possible in the natural world large enough to require a significant and sustained revision of multiple fields of research simultaneously. The implications for the ranch's documented history of anomalous phenomena are equally significant. If there is a living presence beneath the mesa, the phenomena that have been documented above it for decades, the equipment failures, the health effects on researchers, the atmospheric anomalies, the aerial phenomena concentrated in the mesa's airspace, become potentially explicable as the surface manifestations of an active subsurface biology rather than as independent and unconnected anomalies. The mesa would not be the location where Skinwalker Ranch's phenomena are most concentrated because of some abstract property of the geography. It would be the location where they are most concentrated because something living there is generating them, either directly through its biological processes or indirectly through whatever mechanisms it uses to interact with the environment above it. That reframing changes the entire investigative program. It changes what questions the investigation should be asking, what evidence it should be prioritizing, and what the goal of the investigation actually is. Because understanding a geological and electromagnetic anomaly is a different project from understanding a living organism that has apparently occupied the space beneath the mesa for a period of time that the investigation has not yet been able to determine. The public statement Brandon Fugal has made about the mesa detection and the shutdown of the investigation is carefully bounded. He has confirmed that the scientific team found something significant. He has confirmed that the findings prompted him to halt the current phase of investigation. He has framed the shutdown in terms that acknowledge the seriousness of what was detected, without fully characterizing what the detection showed or what the scientific team's interpretation of the data concluded. The gap between what he has said publicly and what the people close to the investigation know he knows is a gap that those who follow Skinwalker Ranch closely have learned to read carefully, because Brandon Fugal is not a person given to understatement, and when he is understating, the distance between what he is saying and what he knows is itself a measure of how significant the undisclosed information is. The people close to the investigation describe a Brandon Fugal who has not simply been shaken by the mesa detection data in the way that a dramatic and unexpected scientific finding shakes someone. They describe a man man who has been processing a specific and detailed understanding of what the data implies, and who has been doing that processing against the backdrop of everything he has personally witnessed and experienced at the ranch across years of ownership. Brandon Fugal has had experiences on the Skinwalker Ranch property that he has not fully disclosed publicly. He has been deliberately measured in what he shares about his personal encounters at the ranch, more measured than the members of his scientific team who have spoken more openly about the effects the property has had on them. And that measured quality of his public persona on the subject of the ranch is understood by the people who know him to reflect not a lack of significant personal experience, but a deliberate choice about how much of that experience to bring into the public conversation at any given point. The mesa detection data gave that deliberate choice a new and more urgent dimension. What Fugal knows about what is beneath the mesa, assembled from years of personal experience at the ranch, from conversations with the scientific team that have not been made public, and from the specific content of the detection data itself, is a body of knowledge that his public statements have been carefully shaped around without fully revealing. The shutdown he ordered was driven by that knowledge, and the terms on which he will eventually share it fully are terms that the current moment has not yet produced. The shutdown Brandon Fugal ordered is not the end of the Skinwalker Ranch investigation. It is the end of the investigation as it was previously configured, operating on assumptions about the mesa that the detection data has permanently invalidated. What comes next is structured around a single question that everything before it has been building toward. What is living beneath the mesa? The biological material and the full detection data record are being analyzed now, and the results of that analysis will determine the terms on which the investigation resumes and the terms on which what was found is disclosed publicly. For Brandon Fugal, this is the moment his 6 years of ownership have produced. He came to the ranch for answers. The mesa detection is an answer, but one that opens onto questions larger than anything the investigation began with. Something is beneath the mesa. It is alive. It has been there across decades of documented phenomena that the people above it could not explain because they did not yet know what was generating them. Now they know. What Brandon Fugal does with that knowledge is the chapter everything before it was building toward. In 2007, the Defense Intelligence Agency sent a senior scientist to Skinwalker Ranch expecting a routine assessment. What he witnessed that night triggered a secret $22 million Pentagon investigation that stayed hidden for years. But the most disturbing part wasn't what happened on the ranch. It's what followed investigators home. Lights, knocks, pressure changes, even inside their children's bedrooms. By the end of this video, you'll understand why the government classified nearly everything it learned, and why some who stepped onto that land say the investigation never really ended. If you want the stories they tried to bury, subscribe now, because what comes next changes everything. James Lakatsky was not sent to Skinwalker Ranch because anyone at the Pentagon believed in paranormal stories. He was sent because the Defense Intelligence Agency needed a professional skeptic, someone trained to dismantle extraordinary claims, not endorse them. With a doctorate in physics and decades spent evaluating advanced aerospace threats, Lakatsky's job was simple: determine whether the reports coming out of a remote Utah ranch were meaningless noise or something that justified concern. From the DIA's perspective, this was supposed to be routine. Review the site, interview witnesses, inspect the equipment, and close the file. Ranchers had claimed strange things before, so had pilots, soldiers, and civilians all over the world. Most cases collapsed under scrutiny. This one was expected to do the same. When Lakatsky arrived in July of 2007, he was accompanied by security personnel and representatives connected to the property's owner, Robert Bigelow. Bigelow had already spent years and millions of dollars documenting unusual activity on the ranch using scientific instruments rather than anecdotes. Infrared cameras, electromagnetic sensors, radiation detectors, and environmental monitors were already running when Lakatsky stepped onto the land. Nothing was being hidden. Everything was being recorded. The visit was scheduled to last only a few hours, but as daylight faded, Bigelow's team suggested staying through the evening. According to them, the activity intensified after dark. Lakatsky agreed, not because he believed the claims, but because dismissing them without direct observation would have been sloppy science. Shortly after nightfall, while standing near one of the ranch's central structures, structures, Lakatsky witnessed something he later admitted he could not explain. A three-dimensional tunnel of light appeared in front of him. Not a beam, not a reflection, but a solid-looking structure suspended in open air. It glowed yellow-white, extended horizontally, and vanished just as suddenly as it appeared. The event lasted less than half a minute. What made the moment impossible to ignore wasn't just what Lakatsky saw. It was what happened simultaneously across the monitoring systems. Electromagnetic fields spiked. Radiation sensors registered brief anomalies. Temperature readings dropped in a localized area around the phenomenon. Independent instruments, calibrated separately, all reacted at the same moment. For a scientist trained to identify equipment failure and coincidence, that convergence was alarming. Lakatsky spent the rest of the night reviewing the data and questioning the research team. By morning, he no longer viewed the ranch as a curiosity. He viewed it as an active anomaly. And before leaving Utah, he heard something even more troubling. Multiple researchers claimed that after working on the ranch, the phenomena didn't stay behind. It followed them home. When James Lakatsky returned to Washington after his visit to Skinwalker Ranch, his briefing did not sound like anything the Defense Intelligence Agency was accustomed to hearing. He didn't describe folklore, mass hysteria, or unreliable witnesses. He described synchronized sensor anomalies, multiple trained observers witnessing the same event, and data that could not be dismissed as equipment failure. His conclusion was direct and unsettling. Whatever was happening at the ranch was real, measurable, and potentially important enough to justify further investigation. Within months, the Pentagon quietly authorized a classified research effort known as the Advanced Aerospace Weapon System Applications Program, or AWSAP. On paper, the program sounded harmless, a study into future aerospace threats and breakthrough technologies. In reality, its central focus was understanding the phenomena observed at Skinwalker Ranch and determining whether similar events were occurring elsewhere. The budget was $22 million, spread across roughly 2 years, and almost no one outside a small circle of officials even knew it existed. The contract was awarded to a research group connected to ranch owner Robert Bigelow, a decision that would later raise eyebrows. But from the government's perspective, the choice was practical. Bigelow's team already had years of documentation, active monitoring systems, and direct access to the only known site where the phenomena could be observed repeatedly. Starting over would have meant losing time and whatever opportunity the ranch represented. Once AWSAP formally launched, Skinwalker Ranch was transformed from private property into something closer to a restricted research installation. Additional sensors were installed, security protocols tightened, scientists, engineers, and intelligence analysts rotated through the site in controlled shifts. Every event was logged, every reading was cross-checked, environmental baselines were established so natural explanations could be ruled out before anything was labeled anomalous. The goal was not to prove the paranormal, it was to eliminate every conventional explanation until nothing remained. And over time, that's exactly what began to happen. The phenomena did not behave like weather, geology, or electromagnetic interference. It appeared sporadically, responded to observation, and refused to repeat itself under identical conditions. Some nights were quiet, others produced events that triggered multiple sensors at once. Even more troubling, AWSAP investigators began confirming reports that Bigelow's team had quietly documented for years. The effects didn't end when researchers left the ranch. Personnel who spent time on the property began reporting strange disturbances back home, sometimes days or weeks later. The pattern was consistent enough that program leadership could no longer ignore it. By the end of its first year, AWSAP had reached a disturbing realization. Skinwalker Ranch wasn't just a place where anomalies happened. It was something that initiated contact, and that contact didn't stop when the investigation did. The moment AWSAP personnel began rotating through Skinwalker Ranch, a troubling pattern resurfaced, one that Robert Bigelow had quietly warned about years earlier. The phenomena did not remain confined to the property. Instead, it appeared to attach itself to people who spent time there, following them back into their private lives long after they had left Utah. The first confirmed off-site incidents came from trained investigators who understood how easily coincidence and misinterpretation could distort perception. These were not casual reports. They were documented, repeated, and in some cases, measured. One researcher reported that within 24 hours of returning home, he began hearing sharp knocks coming from inside the walls of his house. The pattern was unmistakable. 2 quick impacts, a pause, followed by a heavier third strike. It was identical to a knocking sequence he had personally recorded while working at the ranch. Environmental checks found no explanation. No pipes, no HVAC systems, no structural weaknesses. Contractors confirmed the house could not physically produce sounds with that force or rhythm. Yet the knocks continued, sometimes occurring several times in a single day, sometimes disappearing for days before returning without warning. The timing matched nothing natural. More disturbing were reports involving family members who had no knowledge of Skinwalker Ranch or the investigation. Several AWSAP personnel described their children seeing brief flashes of movement, shadow-like shapes, or unexplained lights inside their bedrooms. Others reported sudden drops in temperature localized to specific rooms, or pressure changes strong enough to make ears pop, as if altitude were shifting indoors. These accounts emerged independently from families living in different states, in homes with no shared construction or environmental factors. One DIA analyst who spent less than a single workday on the ranch experienced some of the most severe effects. Within a week of returning home, motion sensors inside his house began triggering without cause. His children described lights moving through rooms when electronics were unplugged. His spouse, who knew nothing about his assignment, independently reported strange sensations and sounds that mirrored reports coming from other investigators' homes. What alarmed AWSAP leadership was not just the events themselves, but their unpredictability. Time spent at the ranch did not correlate with severity. Some personnel worked there for weeks and reported nothing. Others experienced immediate and intense disturbances after only brief exposure. There was no way to predict who would be affected, when it would begin, or how long it would last. As interviews expanded, even individuals who initially denied experiencing anything unusual began recalling small anomalies they had dismissed: doors left open, electronics activating on their own, fleeting visual distortions. Once those moments were documented and compared, the pattern became undeniable. Skinwalker Ranch was no longer just a research site. It appeared to be a point of initiation, a place where contact began but did not end, and that realization forced investigators to confront a far more dangerous possibility. This was not a localized phenomena. It was something that traveled with people, crossing state lines, families, and private homes without permission. Once AWSAP investigators accepted that passive observation was no longer enough, the focus of the Skinwalker Ranch study shifted. If the phenomenon appeared to react to human presence, then controlled interaction might reveal how it operates. The team began designing experiments meant to eliminate coincidence, contamination, and human interference entirely. What followed pushed the investigation beyond anything normally associated with anomaly research. One of the most significant tests involved a sealed environment experiment inside a secured trailer. Researchers placed a small table at the center of the trailer and scattered children's jacks and a rubber ball across its surface. The setup was deliberately simple. The trailer was sealed with tamper-evident locks, monitored by motion sensors, and filmed continuously by cameras placed both inside and outside the structure. Environmental conditions were logged down to minor fluctuations. There was no physical way for anyone to enter, touch the objects, or manipulate the scene without being detected. When the team returned hours later, the scene inside the trailer had changed. The jacks, which had been randomly scattered, were now grouped neatly by color into organized rows. The ball had rolled from one end of the table to the other. No alarms had triggered. No seals were broken. The air pressure, temperature, and humidity remained stable throughout the test period. The cameras showed no visible intrusion and no movement that could account for the rearrangement. The experiment was repeated with stricter controls and additional monitoring. Sometimes the objects moved. Other times, nothing happened at all. The phenomenon appeared selective, refusing to perform on demand. That inconsistency became just as important as the successful trials. Random environmental forces do not choose when to act. Other experiments produced similarly unsettling results. Sudden flashes of light appeared in sealed rooms, often disabling cameras immediately after recording them. Narrow bands of freezing air moved through enclosed spaces with surgical precision, unaffected by ventilation or airflow. Electromagnetic spikes occurred only while measurements were actively being taken, then vanished the moment equipment was powered down. The conclusion was unavoidable. Whatever was interacting with the researchers was not passive. It responded to observation, adjusted its behavior, and avoided capture. Skinwalker Ranch was no longer behaving like a natural anomaly. It was behaving like something that knew it was being studied and did not want to be understood. As AWSAP continued documenting events at Skinwalker Ranch, the investigation quietly crossed a line inside the Pentagon. What began as an attempt to understand unexplained phenomena was now raising questions that went far beyond science. The issue was no longer what the phenomenon was, it was what it could do and whether it posed a threat that existing security systems were never designed to handle. From a defense perspective, the most alarming development was the off-site activity. If something encountered at Skinwalker Ranch could follow investigators home and manifest inside private residences, then distance offered no protection. Several AWSAP personnel held high-level security clearances and routinely worked inside classified environments. The obvious question emerged: if the phenomenon could appear in a suburban home, what prevented it from appearing inside a secure facility? That possibility forced leadership to consider scenarios no intelligence framework could comfortably address. If the activity represented an advanced surveillance system, one capable of tracking individuals across state lines without electronics, signals, or physical devices, it would surpass any known human technology. If a foreign adversary possessed such a capability, it would represent a catastrophic intelligence failure. Russia and China were quietly evaluated as hypothetical sources, but the theory quickly unraveled. The phenomenon had been reported in the Uinta Basin for decades, long before modern aerospace or surveillance breakthroughs were possible. That left a more unsettling explanation. The phenomenon might not be human at all. This hypothesis was deeply uncomfortable for officials, but increasingly difficult to dismiss. The behavior documented by AWSAP showed awareness, responsiveness, and selectivity. It reacted to observation. It adapted when experiments changed. It targeted individuals rather than locations. These were not traits of weather systems, geological activity, or electromagnetic interference. They were traits associated with intelligence. Briefings prepared for senior officials emphasized the same conclusions again and again. The phenomena was real. It was measurable. It exceeded known technological capabilities, and its origin and intent were unknown. Worse still, it demonstrated the ability to interact with human environments in ways that bypassed physical security entirely. AWSAP leadership warned that continuing the investigation carried risks that could not be quantified. Personnel were reporting psychological stress. Families were being affected. There were no protocols for protecting people once exposure occurred. Participation in the program meant accepting unknown long-term consequences, something no agency could ethically mandate. At that point, Skinwalker Ranch stopped being a scientific mystery. It became a liability. The Pentagon now faced an impossible dilemma: ignore the phenomenon and risk missing a genuine threat, or continue investigating and expose more people to something they could not control, predict, or contain. And that dilemma would soon shape a decision that permanently changed the course of the program. By 2010, AWSAP had reached a point the Pentagon was not prepared to handle. The program had produced years of data, witness testimony, and experimental results that pointed to something genuinely anomalous, but none of it fit neatly into existing military or intelligence frameworks. The investigation wasn't yielding a weapon, a countermeasure, or a clear technological breakthrough. Instead, it was producing questions that senior leadership had no way to answer, much less explain to Congress. Officially, AWSAP ended because of budget constraints and shifting priorities. That explanation was technically true, but deeply incomplete. Inside the Defense Intelligence Agency, the program had become increasingly difficult to justify. Briefings to senior officials were uncomfortable. Analysts struggled to condense findings into slides that wouldn't sound absurd to decision-makers unfamiliar with the data. Describing a phenomenon that reacted to observation, followed people home, and avoided detection did not translate into actionable intelligence. Oversight pressure also mounted. Congressional staff began asking where the money was going and what measurable outcomes the program had produced. AWSAP's defenders argued that identifying unknown phenomena was the outcome, especially when those phenomena demonstrated capabilities beyond known technology. Critics countered that the research sounded like paranormal speculation and carried no obvious military application. In a tightening budget environment, programs that could not clearly define their value were the first to be cut. Internal disagreement worsened the situation. Some officials believed AWSAP had uncovered the most important intelligence mystery of the modern era and deserved expansion. Others saw it as a dangerous distraction that risked damaging the agency's credibility. Leadership turnover only amplified the divide, as new decision-makers inherited a program they neither approved nor fully understood. But the most decisive factor was liability. By this stage, multiple personnel had reported continued disturbances long after their work at Skinwalker Ranch ended. Some described anxiety, sleep disruption, and stress linked directly to unexplained activity in their homes. Families were affected. Children were affected. The government had no framework for for addressing or compensating consequences tied to something it could neither define nor control. Continuing the program meant accepting responsibility for unknown risks that extended far beyond the workplace, and that was a risk no agency could formally accept. When funding expired, AWSAP was quietly dissolved. A much smaller follow-on effort continued under a different name, focusing narrowly on unexplained aerial phenomena and advanced propulsion concepts, stripped of the ranch, the off-site effects, and the most controversial findings. Monitoring at Skinwalker Ranch was reduced, personnel were reassigned, and almost all of the program's reports, data, and conclusions were classified. The investigation didn't end because it failed. It ended because what it uncovered created problems the system was never designed to face. Although AWSAP officially ended in 2010, the conclusions it reached did not disappear with the funding. Inside classified channels, the program reshaped how the U.S. government viewed unexplained phenomena. The investigation established several points that could no longer be dismissed as speculation. First, the activity associated with Skinwalker Ranch was real and measurable. It was not the result of faulty sensors, exaggeration, or misidentified natural events. Independent instruments repeatedly captured anomalies that violated known physical expectations. Second, the phenomena displayed behavior that appeared responsive and adaptive. It did not manifest randomly. Activity often increased when monitoring intensified and diminished when observations stopped. Experiments rarely repeated under identical conditions, suggesting the phenomenon was not governed by fixed mechanical rules. This alone separated it from weather systems, geological effects, or electromagnetic interference. Third, investigators concluded the phenomena demonstrated capabilities beyond known human technology. Instant acceleration, localized environmental manipulation, and apparent interaction without physical contact were all documented. These characteristics placed the activity outside any known aerospace or defense platform. Whether it represented a future technology, an unknown natural force, or something entirely non-human remained unresolved. Perhaps most troubling was the conclusion that the phenomenon was not bound to location. AWSAP data showed that exposure, not geography, mattered. Individuals who spent time at the ranch experienced effects later in unrelated locations, sometimes thousands of miles away. This finding fundamentally changed the investigative model. Skinwalker Ranch was no longer viewed as the source, it was the point of contact. These conclusions directly influenced follow-on Pentagon efforts. Later programs studying unexplained aerial phenomena adopted AWSAP's data standards while carefully avoiding its more controversial associations. The government did not abandon the subject, it narrowed it, rebranded it, and buried the most disruptive implications under classification. Years later, fragments of AWSAP's work began surfacing. Scientists like Hal Puthoff discussed aspects of the research in limited public forums. James Lakatsky later co-authored a book confirming the government's involvement, though key details remained redacted. These disclosures confirmed what insiders already knew. The investigation validated decades of reports rather than debunking them. AWSAP didn't solve the mystery of Skinwalker Ranch. What it did was far more unsettling. It proved that the mystery was real, intelligent, and not confined to one place. A conclusion that still shapes how the government approaches the unknown today. When AWSAP was shut down, the public assumption was that the government had lost interest in Skinwalker Ranch. In reality, interest never disappeared. It simply changed form. What ended was the structure of the program, not the concern that had created. The findings were too disruptive to vanish. They were instead absorbed into classified channels, where the most unsettling conclusions could be managed quietly. Internally, the government accepted that Skinwalker Ranch had never been the true problem. The ranch was not a container holding the phenomenon. It was a trigger, a place where interaction began. AWSAP data showed that once exposure occurred, distance no longer mattered, time no longer mattered. The activity followed individuals into their homes, their families, and potentially their workplaces. That single realization redefined the entire risk profile. From a policy standpoint, this created an unsolvable issue. You can restrict access to land, you can shut down facilities, you can terminate contracts, but you cannot contain something that attaches to people rather than places. Continuing the investigation meant knowingly exposing personnel to an unknown variable with no countermeasures, no protective protocols, and no way to reverse its effects. That reality made long-term study ethically and operationally impossible. Years later, fragments of the truth surfaced. Former officials cautiously confirmed the existence of the program. James Lakatsky publicly acknowledged that what he witnessed at the ranch could not be explained within known physics. Other researchers admitted the off-site effects were real, documented, and deeply concerning. Still, the majority of the data remains classified, not because it was trivial, but because it challenged foundational assumptions about reality, security, and human control. The most disturbing conclusion AWSAP reached was also the simplest. The phenomenon did not behave like a force of nature. It behaved like something aware, something selective, something that responded when observed and withdrew when studied too closely. Whether it represents non-human intelligence, an unknown aspect of reality, or a system humanity does not yet understand, remains unresolved. AWSAP did not end with answer. It ended with a boundary the government refused to cross again. Skinwalker Ranch became a lesson rather than a project, proof that some investigations don't fail because they lack evidence, but because the evidence forces questions no institution is prepared to answer. And if the phenomenon truly follows people home, then the most unsettling possibility remains unanswered. It may not be finished with us yet.